Good evening. The news gang is here and the trip to China is on, and the handshake mates are looking for more billions together. Remember the overborrowing, overspending and overstealing? You can't make this stuff up. Also on the show tonight, the new political rally platform called The Pulpit. Who is preaching the political sermon? And what about the money? And we'll speak about that divided house, the levy and the lottery. But let's begin with China, where the two best friends, what is that thing called again?
BFFs.
BFFs, are in China looking for more money for the railways. The former PM talked about it over the weekend. Some people have said, well, he's there to attend the Belt and Road International Forum, something like that, right?
Yes.
Joe, what's going on, Jamila? You're nodding very loudly as if you're in China.
368 billion, Joe.
Yes.
Tunaenda to borrow 368 billion for the construction of the Naivasha-Kisumu leg. You see the...
Yeah, but surely that thing needs to get to Kisumu.
It needs to get to Kisumu. I know, and that is what Raila Odinga said to the people of that area when he was telling them about his trip. Akasema naenda China, tunaenda ku borrow pesa so that we finish this leg of standard gauge radio. You know, we have the port in Kisumu. It was built in 1901, but it's really not up to capacity. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. Completely underperforming. So if it is completed and we have the SGR going all the way to Kisumu, it's a good thing for the people of Kisumu. But also, how much is it costing us? Now, if you look at how much so far project SGR has costed us about 845 billion. Do you know what that makes it, Joe? It makes it cost per kilometer. The SGR cost us 800 million. This is twice the international standards. Apparently, it's supposed to be at least 400 million. Ours is costing 800 million. Now, we have a phase 2C, which should take us all the way to Malaba. If we do end up having that, we'll spend over 900 billion on this. And with interest and all those things, we'll be spending about $1 trillion. And this is the amount of money that the KRA tries to collect from Kenyans per year. So we'll be spending about 1 trillion if we do this all the way to Malaba. It's a good thing, but I think it's just too expensive. We can't afford it.
Can we also talk about the fact that it's also making losses as we speak? It costs, what, about 100 million shillings per day to run it, and is yet to break even. So that is also something that we need to think about. But can I just talk about the president's new BFF for just a moment? In 2016, as you said, Joe, at the beginning.
Unless you mean the former prime minister, just to be sure.
The former prime minister.
There are many BFFs in this world.
Oh, there are many
in this world.
But right now, the president's only BFF.
Okay, fair enough. If you insist. So what about
And I do. He talked about overborrowing, overspending, and overstealing. And in 2016, he had 5 demands that he made to the president. He talked about convening a national public debt conference to come up with ways of controlling the public debt. He wanted full disclosure on the amounts borrowed, what they were being used for, how we're doing the payments, and a reevaluation of the government's priorities. He said this, I want to quote, "Jubilee is pursuing a weird and pedestrian policy where the deeper we have gotten into debt, the more we have borrowed. We're increasing public borrowing. It has become unsustainable and also unconstitutional." I'm not clear as to when he now changed tack and is now on board with it. Certainly, SGR needs to get to Kisumu, but at what cost? And remember, this is a loan. Well, some of it is in concession.
Isn't it also a question of Raila Odinga and the people who support him, his party and everything, finding themselves in a very awkward place, in the sense that our politics in this country is such that it is almost impossible for people to have civil conversations, so that if you disagree with Gashuri, it is actually perceived that now you're fighting, and your supporters, just because of that disagreement, could actually end up fighting on the streets, throwing stones and everything. So suddenly you have a situation where the very issues on which they were fighting, the very issues on the basis of which their supporters were at loggerheads, the election was simply the culmination, but there were a lot of other things. Now those are the very questions that we are dealing with now. And I think for Raila, with the handshake, he probably finds himself in that space where he really is not sure what to do. And speaking to a lot of ODM members and everything, you get the sense that in this place which they don't quite understand what they can or cannot say. So they're almost walking on eggshells, according to me. Gashuri, you spend a lot of time with those people in parliament. What do you hear?
You see, this talks about our politics or the nature of our politics. Why do we support A and oppose B? Is it because we are convinced that A is good and B is bad? Or is it because the people who control decision making at the political level have said A is bad. So we all say A is bad depending on who the leader is, or B is good depending on who the leader is. You see, let me give you an example. During the 2017 campaigns, President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy, together with the entire Jubilee Brigade, went around the country calling Raila Odinga Kimodo. This guy. Kimogoroki or something like that. Yeah? On the other hand, the story was Uhuru Kenyatta is ni kifaranga cha computer. You remember those stories? But 1 year later, this is my brother. This is my elder brother. This is my handshake mate, and so on and so forth. The people who were quarreling become best friends all of a sudden, and no explanation whatsoever to their supporters. So if today Raila Odinga comes up and says this handshake is not working, those who are saying this handshake is very good will 360,000 about turn and go the other way around
without a bodyguard, and you'll have like 1,000 volunteers.
The same applies to President Uhuru Kenyatta. If he goes and says this handshake is not working, the guys who have been celebrating Raila Odinga will say, yeah, his handshake is not working. So it's a question of how much as a country do we interrogate what is happening and who is telling us what. You see, that time it was politically expedient to say we are over borrowing, we are over stealing, and so on and so forth. But because the handshake is here, the narrative has to change directly. So sometimes as a country, maybe we need to consult each other, think through some of the decisions that are made, and find whether they make sense.
But Linus, you like to say that facts are stubborn. I mean, in spite of all of these things, there is the reality that the debt levels are unsustainable. There's the reality that if the SGR was expensive back then, it surely couldn't have become cheaper right now.
Right.
And the question would actually be, how much energy would there have been if this SGR was being extended from Naivasha to, say, Maralal? It's facing north. It's a totally different direction. But it tells you also, and Francis is completely right, about the divide in this country, where now this SGR will be taken as the extension for Raila Odinga. Uhuru has started from Mombasa and ended in Naivasha, and then Raila starts from Naivasha to Kisumu. And that is the political image that will stick there for a very long time. But talking of Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, we're talking of Genesis 19. That's where they are. We equate politics to marriage a lot of times in this country. We draw analogies of how marriage is related to politics. This is what has happened. On 9th March, these two gentlemen, Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, went to the altar somewhere in Harambee House, for better or worse. Raila cannot turn back, even on the things he may not totally agree with, like the national debt. Deep down, and I mean, Yvonne has read out where he stood. Those things have not changed. Our debt situation has just gotten worse. I'm sure he disagrees in his conscience. But look, he can't turn back, because he'll become a pillar of stone, politically speaking. Lot's wife, if it does attempt to turn back on the handshake, that will be politically quite suicidal. So he has to walk all the way with Uhuru Kenyatta. Same to Uhuru. Uhuru cannot really turn back on the handshake as well. It's too late for both of them. He
actually said it during the State of the Nation address. He said there is no turning back.
Yes, it's too late for both of them. So
yeah, and just to underscore that, when the Daily Nation reached out to the former premier to just understand, ahead of this trip, he was not available, but his spokesman, Dennis Onyango, gave a statement to the Daily Nation where he said that the ODM leaders' stand on the first phase of SGR has not changed, and that there was no value for money. However, this is what Dennis Onyango continued to say, now that we are already committed to it, as we are already here, we need to beef it up and make value for money by extending it to Kisumu and Busia. I don't even understand what this statement means. If there was no value for money, so how are you going to make value for money by extending it to Kisumu and Busia?
Well, I think what I hear a lot of people say about the SGR is that, one, if the whole thing had been, the very idea of having a rail network that connects Mombasa to
Inland,
Uganda and the
yes.
hinterland
Right.
in Africa and that sort of thing is without a doubt noble. And many people would say that if, for example, that thing had been negotiated as one deal, it probably would have been cheaper, because right now we are talking about many different deals. So you're negotiating from Mombasa to Nairobi, you pick it from Nairobi to Naivasha, 120 kilometers. You're thinking, okay, that's too short. Why don't you do something longer? Then now you're thinking again from Kisumu to
Naivasha to Kisumu,
Naivasha to Kisumu, and then now you will pick it from Kisumu to Malaba. And then the next thing someone will say, oh, this thing actually should be electric. Can we now electrify it? And then you start doing it in phases. So there's a sense in which also projects are tied to how much people can eat, or what is in it for different people. Because there's no justification. There is no way of anyone reasonably understanding why we would be doing this thing in all these bits, and then we keep going back to the same China. You know, if we are saying, okay, phase one, now we are going to Belgium or some strange country somewhere, but it's the same country. We are going to China over and over again. So why don't we just go once?
But we go to China for a very good reason. There are people who avoid going to regular banks for their loans. You go to a Shylock, you go to somebody who can avail it with what? You leave your title deed or driving license or your logbook, you know, such small collateral. And that is what China has been. And you see a lot of African countries, including ours. President Kenyatta spoke in December and said that China meets Kenya at the point of need. The conditions are favorable. It's easy to get these loans, and I think that's the reason we.
So why you are saying why China?
Yes. Because I was speaking about China today. It came out. The Parliamentary Budget Office released a document that was presented in Parliament to the Budget and Appropriations Committee, and in fact, it was one of the stories we had in the bulletin, saying that 8 state bodies may be lost if if government defaults in repayment of about 147 billion shillings in external debt. That is as December 2018. These government bodies are from Kenya Airways, which is 76 billion, Kenya Ports Authority 33 billion, Kenya Power 14 billion, Kenya Electricity Generating Company KENGEN 10 billion, Kenya Broadcasting KBC 6.9, Kenya Railways 4.59. Yes, and now these loans the huge percentage of it are from China and the World Bank's International Development Association, which is 64% and 71% of this. And this shows you that it increased compared to 2017 December. The amount was at 133.7. Now it's 147.7 billion shillings, the amount of money that we are in default at Jalipa Hayo Madeni. But that's just this. But now when you look at now, you spoke about the president and his association with Raila and how bromance and they're together. As it stands now, the president is being associated with projects that people don't like. For instance, the Huduma number, the housing levy. It's being forced down people's throats. Basically that, because you look at the anger on social media.
There are 15 million people have registered. Probably controversial projects that people are arguing about.
Yes, people, and in fact, today I think it was the government spokesman spoke in the morning on Daybreak, and he said the consequences of not registering for Huduma were dire. If you don't register, mambo yako itakuwa mbaya. And now this, we were talking about even last week, forcing people, kuwalazimisha that you have to do this. People saying, I didn't tell you I wanted a house, maybe I want something else, but you're being told lazima ujisajili and all that. That is what the president is being associated with. But now, because Raila Akunai Kabisa is also being associated with such projects that are actually not popular. So you take the good and the bad in this bromance.
So let's talk about China, ladies and gentlemen. There's been quite a debate going on in this country about China. One, why China? Secondly, what are these guys up to here?
So first, why China? You know, increasingly, the Western nations have proven to be the more nationalist tendencies. Look at what's happening with Brexit, look at Trump in the US, and also the anti-migration laws. So, you know, African nations are slowly getting the signal from the Western nations. And like Kaikai said, it's also the conditions that are given by China more favorable. But let me say this, that is not necessarily a bad thing. That is actually required for growth of many African states. But it is what is in it for either party. China is very clear about what they want. It's Xi Jinping's promise of what he called the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. What they're doing is expanding. They have a huge population and they are looking for raw materials. They're also looking for markets for their products. And let's face it, it is all about diplomatic influence. It's about finding national interests and securing national resources. So they are very clear. It is essentially an expansionist agenda.
Remember the great rejuvenation that you talk about.
Yeah.
Hu Jintao actually talked about it in 2007, but he said that it has to be matched with a sort of the cultural rejuvenation.
Yes.
So the Chinese culture around the world. It is what they call soft power,
Soft
where
power.
they basically are saying that they would like people to like China. Actually, the current president Xi Jinping it talks a lot about soft power in very specific terms, and he says, well, what needs to happen is that China's likability has to go hand in hand with its rise.
Yes, absolutely.
And they are doing this in many ways. The
TV
cash and concrete thing, of
Yes.
course. They have the cultural centers.
They have the language
the Confucian
Confucius
Institute,
Institute, yes.
actually.
Yeah.
And don't
They have
forget
got
the
500 of
CGN,
CGN.
permanent
Yeah,
TV station,
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and even here, I mean, they have the Confucius Institutes in Kenya, about 4 of them right now, teaching Mandarin. And then, of course, the Kenyan government has said that they'll start teaching Mandarin in schools in 2020.
Yeah.
And it'll be offered like
Have you also
other
forgotten that the
languages,
Jubilee
cultural
Party is also
exchanges.
modeled around the
yes,
Chinese
the Chinese
ruling
Communist
party?
Party.
So China has a bigger agenda.
Yes.
I think the question then has to be whether
Do we have an agenda? I mean, and just to add on to what you're talking about, soft power, it's also about a military presence, something that China, hadn't really done before. You've seen the military base that they've now put up in Djibouti, and this is, of course, after Djibouti sort of defaulted on their loan. So they're looking at dominance in every way, militarily, soft power, economic power. But listen, economic power is what a lot of people equate to what was gunboat diplomacy before, where they would come in and fire. But now China is getting national and sovereign, without ever having to fire a single shot.
France is an interesting dimension that I've seen over the last couple of years, whereas Yvonne talked about the West having become more insular and more inward-looking and focusing on their little. Well, I could say little, but domestic matters without thinking about the bigger picture. There's a sense in which what China is doing is suddenly making them sit up and check, hey, what's going on? Suddenly, the US, for example, is now bidding for road contracts in Kenya. They are supposed to build the road from Mombasa coming this way, the sort
second,
of bypass
the parallel,
from Honza and that sort of thing. Is it that not an interesting dimension that China's coming here may throw something else into the mix, that the West might wake up and smell the coffee, and Kenya suddenly becomes this what is that you said, the girl that everybody is trying to woo around the village?
Yeah.
But
it's a balance.
for Africa.
It's a balance, because every so often when our president or any top government official goes to London or goes to Washington, they convince them that tuko pamoja. Yeah, but still there's that silent scenario that I think China is now the new guy around here. It's a balance, but more fundamentally, I think the discussion around China and around other nations should be on the amount of money that we are borrowing, what we are using that money for, and the projects that we are investing that money into, whether they are actually value for money. Because this is not free money. This is money that we will pay continuously for long time.
And we have borrowed it anyway.
Actually, we have already borrowed it. And you see, you cannot say, Sasa, we will not pay, because we have already borrowed and some of these projects are ongoing. Look at the SGR, for example. There have been fundamental questions that have been raised insofar as the cost of SGR from Mombasa to Nairobi is concerned. A lot of it, we were told, some good amount of money went into compensation for land that was acquired, what they call compulsory acquisition. I mean, you've seen the National Land Commission, the commissioners, Mohammed Sozuri and the other commissioners who have left, some of them, are in court, and they will continue to be in court because there were questions about the amount of money that was paid as compensation. This is an interesting issue. I hope that as the new face of SGR is constructed from Naivasha to Kisumu, that fundamental question about compulsory acquisition of land is taken care of. That the new commission that will be coming in will take care of that, because if we spend a lot of that money acquiring land and paying that amount of money in such exorbitant prices, then we will have a problem.
But Kakai, when you speak to, stepping back on this railway issue, when you speak to people, for example, in the hotel industry in Mombasa and all that, they actually say that the SGR has contributed to stabilizing the hotel industry at a time when international tourists don't come that often, but every weekend, every single day, there are lots of Kenyans who are going by SGR, and that it's literally keeping those hotels down there open. So there's a whole dynamic around that railway. So at what point do we start saying, okay, maybe it costs too much money, but there's a bright side to it?
Absolutely. There's absolutely no doubt that the SGR has improved, first of all, basic transport. A lot of people now are avoiding the road or even air and taking the SGR. I've taken the SGR with my family, and it's actually a very fantastic ride, considering the dilapidated thing that was there before, which I don't think any one of us rode on that successor. Oh, the Lunatic Express.
Those many years ago, it was actually better than...
Yes. But like Francis points out, there is bad news associated with all this.
Yeah.
The first thing you need to note is in whose hands is the SGR, physically speaking.
Yes.
When you're in the SGR, look at the stations.
Yeah.
Who is manning them? China is manning them. Who are the officials, who are the engineers that come in there? And except for the basic front office staff, the rest are really Chinese. There is a real risk here. And last year there was talk of the takeover of Mombasa Port, over 227 billion debt. I hope we all remember that.
Yeah.
The president came out and said, no, there is no such fear. But look, it can be denied, but facts are facts. Where are our loans from? They come from the Exim Bank. Now, our relationship with that bank is exactly the same kind of relationship an individual can have with a bank. You've borrowed the money, you go there as an individual.
Yeah.
So Kenya is an individual, it's a person who owes this amount of money. Is there a risk of taking over some of the facilities? Yes, a very, very high risk. Let's not forget the story of the Sri Lankan port that was taken over. Yes, it was taken over by China. It still runs it because Sri Lanka could not repay the debt. Now, you will continue seeing the Chinese manning the SGR until we pay the final last coin. So, SGR will be a very, very good facility, fantastic, but let's not forget, it's Chinese owned, Chinese operated. We can't call it ours.
But the next, and it's run, and they're supposed to run it for the next 10 years until they get their money and leave. But the rate at which we are making losses right now, it is And just also talking about the Mombasa port, I know I've said this before, and I will continue to say it until the president responds to our colleague Mark Masai's question on whether our port is safe. The freedom to access of information, I know Nation Media Group has written and made a formal request for this deal and whether our port is safe. We have not yet received that. That being said, Kenya is also rushing for debt to China because China is using, debt obviously to exert influence. What are they doing? They're throwing money at Ethiopia. And Ethiopia, we know, has surpassed us in some of these at Mozambique. So Kenya is feeling if we're left out, then we will see development in our across our neighbors. But let me just end by saying this. Debt is not bad. Debt from China is not a bad thing. We need to solve our internal issues. The issue of corruption, the issue of value for money, the issue of prioritizing which projects will fast track us and be value for money and start to pay that back, and also whether the debt is sustainable. KRA is year on year missing its targets. And for heaven's sake, the government needs to find creative ways, in fact, Treasury, of raising revenue. It cannot be from taxes alone and from 3 million people who are in the formal sector. Register those in the informal sector, give them services, they will pay their taxes just like that. Make the people richer, they will pay higher taxes, and therefore you're able to pay the debt and it's value.
You talk about our own internal issues, Yvonne, and you spoke about losses.
Yes.
The SGR is making losses, and you said it. Yeah. Because last year, SGR operations posted 10 billion in losses, despite costing the taxpayer at least 12 billion.
Yeah.
It costs about $1 billion a month to run the line between Nairobi and Mombasa. That's just that.
Yes.
Number two, you talk about priorities. What is more important to us as a country? We are facing starvation, we are facing drought, we have issues with our medical, we don't have dawa kwa hospitali, we have people who don't get treatment, you have stories of people being detained in hospital because of not paying bills, you have people saying I have an NHIF card but I cannot get services that I need. We have all these issues, cost of living going up. What are our priorities as a country? Do we really have to go borrow money to finish the SGR, or there are more important things that we can use the money for?
My argument is borrowing is not bad. Actually, even at a personal level, it is important to borrow some money to do development, build a house, buy a car, and so on and so forth. The question is what you do to how you spend that money that you borrow. Look, statistics, and this explains why very many Kenyans are apprehensive every time they see our president talking to China or going to any place, because if currently we're talking about 5.4 trillion shillings in debt, and bad news is that by 2022, it is estimated that we will have borrowed up to a tune of 7.17 trillion shillings. We're spending close to 1 trillion shillings in debt repayment every year. That amount of money is going to increase. In fact, for a country that has a budget of 3 trillion shillings, if you're spending 1 trillion shillings to pay debts and 1.5 trillion shillings for recurrent expenditure, how much money are you left with for development? 500 billion.
And we have to take a break.
Yeah, we need to take a break. We go to... All right.
We'll take a break. We'll be back with more.
We'll be right
yes, back. Anthony Kangede says, call it handshake of loans ama handshake ya maroni.
Yeah.
Yeah, amesema hivyo.
Okay.